Hi, I'm going to read to you. It's our first chapter of Habibi by Naomi Shihab. Kiss. The secret kiss grew larger and larger. Leanna Aboud had just tasted her first kiss when her parents announced they were leaving the country. They were having a family meeting at the Country Time Diner in St. Louis, the place Leanna and her brother Rafiq felt embarrassed in because their father usually returned his dinner for not being hot enough. Of course, no one knew about the kiss, which Leanna was carrying in a secret pouch right under her skin. Dr. Kamal Aboud, whom they called Poppy, jumped right in. "What do you think about moving to Jerusalem and starting new lives?" His face cracked into its most contagious smile. He was handsome and lean, with rumpled black hair and dark eyes. Leanna's best friend Claire always said he looked more like a movie star than any of the other dads. Leanna's mother, Susan, filled in the gaps, as usual. She had long brown hair, which she usually wore pulled back in a straight ponytail, hazel eyes, and a calm way of talking. "Our family has reached a crossroads. You," she opened her hand toward Leanna, "are going into high school next year. You," she pointed to Rafiq, "are going into middle school. Once you get into your new schools, you will feel less like moving across the ocean. This is the best time we can think of to make the big change." The kiss started burning a hole up through Leanna's smooth left cheek where it had begun. The blaze spread over to her lips where the kiss had ended. She could imagine her lips igniting over the menu. "Wow," Rafiq said. He combed both his hands backward through his curly black hair, the way he always did when he was excited. "Leanna, what are you looking at?" Poppy asked. She hadn't smiled back yet. Her eyes were fixed on the floral wreath hanging over the cash register, and her mouth tried to shape the words, "Maybe it's a bad idea," but nothing came out. She felt the same way she did after the car accident on an icy road last winter, when she'd noticed that magic marker stain on the seat instead of the blood coming out of her elbow, stunned into observation. Leave the country? Of course it was a rumor Leanna had been hearing all her life. Someday her family would leave the United States, the country her mother and she and her brother had been born in, and move overseas to the mixed-up country her father had been born in. It was only fair. He wanted to show it to them. He wanted them to know both sides of their history and become the fully rounded human beings they were destined to be. "You know," Poppy said, "I never planned to be an immigrant forever. I never thought I'd become a citizen. I planned to return home after medical school. I didn't know." And here Rafiq picked up the familiar refrain with him, like the chorus to America the Beautiful. "I'd fall in love and stay for so many years." Rafiq covered his heart with his hand and closed his eyes, and Poppy laughed. Poppy wanted Leanna and Rafiq to know Sidi, their grandmother. He would transfer to Al-Masca Hospital in Jerusalem. He'd been in touch with them by mail and fax. Leanna and Rafiq would have double lives. When Leanna was younger, she used to think this sounded like fun. That was long before last night's kiss. The biggest surprise about the kiss was it didn't come from Philip, the person on Leanna's right at the movie theater, who might have kissed her because they'd been good friends for years and she had a crush on him, but from Jackson on her left. Jackson was in her social studies class. Leanna liked the way he smelled, like Poppy's old bottle of English leather. They'd traded notes about Malia and Ethiopia, and she complimented him on his enormous vocabulary. Sometimes they stood together in lunch line discussing the dazzling enchiladas, and they ate together, but not every day. Jackson had leaned over to ask what the actress in the movie had just said, and the next thing you knew, Leanna knew, his lips were nuzzling her cheek. They moved to her mouth and held there for a moment, pressing lightly. Leanna had no idea what happened at the end of the movie. It was a swirling blue blur, like an underwater scene. Afterward, her friends crowded toward the exit doors laughing. Jackson tripped over someone's empty popcorn tub on the floor. Leanna liked that he picked it up and threw it away. It said something about him. But they didn't talk much at Claire's pizza party, and all they said when Poppy picked Leanna up what later was, "See you at school," as if nothing had happened. Still, there was something different between them now, a little glimmer. His lips were warm. Leanna had never imagined lips being warm. And now she was leaving the country? The waitress refilled Poppy's tea. "What will we do with our things?" mumbled Leanna. "The piano, the blue bicycles, the boxes of tangle-haired dolls Leanna hadn't played with in years, though she refused to give them away, the mountains of books, the blackboard on an easel where she and Rafik left each other notes. It stood in the hallway between their rooms. Did you take my red marker? Big trouble, buddy. Red marker seized by Klingon intruders." Who would they be if they had to start all over again? Leanna started thinking of the word immigrant in a different way at that moment, and her skin prickled. Now she would be an immigrant. Poppy curled his fingers at the waitress. "Honey," he said to her, "my potato is positively icy inside." The next chapter, Jet Set. Some days were long sentences flowing into one another. They flew to New York in steamy June, left their 17 suitcases and Leanna's violin stored at the airport, and spent one day lugging stuff, backpacks around to the Empire State Building and riding up to the inside of the Statue of Liberty's head. Poppy was retracing his steps. He wanted them to see exactly what he'd seen when he first moved to the United States. When Miss Liberty appeared through the fog holding up her hand in the harbor, I felt she was an old girlfriend welcoming me. I'd seen so many pictures of her. "It's not just a hand, Poppy, it's a torch," Rafik said. Her mother flashed him a quieting look. She wanted Poppy to keep telling his stories. Poppy recalled, "When I saw a sign for hot dogs, I thought they were made of dog meat. It scared me. I thought the big shiny trash cans were mailboxes." 19 years after his first arrival, they ate giant pretzels from a cart on the street. The big grains of salt on the pretzel skin tasted delicious. They bumped into disoriented families on summer vacations. They ate double scoops of Rocky Road ice cream. "After this, you'll call ice cream booza," Poppy said, "and it won't have marshmallows either. I don't think they've crossed the ocean yet." "They get wet," said Rafik. Leanna rolled her eyes. Leanna felt exhilarated by the skyscrapers. Their glittering lines lifted her out of her worry. She wished she could ride every sleek elevator up and down, punching buttons, seeing who got on and off. Some days you remembered the world was full of wonderful people you hadn't met yet. She bought 7 postcards with different pictures. The Brooklyn Bridge, Washington Square, the fish market, imagining which one she might send to Jackson. By the time they returned to the airport at sundown for their night flight overseas, a storm was swirling somewhere over the dark Atlantic. They heard rumors about its passengers at the gate. Ominous booms of distant thunder made Leanna feel edgy inside. Yippee, loose bugs. she thought. Their flight was running 2 hours late. Leanna kept her eyes on the other people waiting to fly. She wanted to see if they looked nervous, but they only looked sleepy. A yawning lady with a flowered scarf tied under her chin lugged a food basket jammed with Jell-O boxes, paper napkins, and coffee filters. Didn't they have those things in the Middle East? Another lady rolled up her husband's raincoat and made her little children lie down on the floor with their heads on it. No one looked nervous at all. When Rafiq unzipped his backpack and pulled out a giant sack of corn nuts, Leanna went to sit at the other side of the gate. She couldn't stand to sit next to somebody crunching. She scribbled in her notebook, "One Indian lady in a purple sari crying, the size of goodbye." Clover Chain is the next chapter. Some days I am brave, but other days I almost disappear. Before the Abowd family left St. Louis, there were many times Leanna thought she would rather be anyone else on their block, someone who planned to stick around in the neighborhood doing dull things like going to Menino's grocery store and staring at watermelons and jars of peanut butter stacked up. She would rather not have to change her life. She knew the bush with red berries that were probably poison. She knew which bus number to take downtown. Often the Abowd family drove around on slow Sunday evenings with their car windows wide open to smell the air. That's what Poppy said people did in Jerusalem. St. Louis air smelled of tar and donuts, old boards washed up out of the muddy river, red bricks, and licorice. Leafy greens of bushes and trees ran together outside their car. How could Leanna give all this up? She knew what grass smelled like, a rich brew of dirt and green roots right after the rain. And her fingers knew exactly the best way to twist skinny green clover stems together to make a long chain to stretch across the street to stop cars. She would stand on one side and Rafiq would stand on the other, holding his end for as long as he could pay attention. Of course, the cars could have driven right through the chain if they tried. Most drivers would laugh and motion for Leanna and Rafiq to pull the chain back. But one day, right after they started telling people they were moving overseas, a man in a red pickup truck slammed on his brakes, shook his fist from the window, and shouted that he'd tell the police and make them pay a fine. "We're children," Leanna called out. He glared at them, then dropped the chain, and he drove away. "Could he really do that?" Rafiq asked. "Let's go in," Leanna said. "I don't want to play." The next chapter's blip. Being little was a skin that fit. It seemed to Leanna that Poppy was walking differently during the weeks before they left. His stride had a new lift in it. He made lots of overseas phone calls. Mrs. Abowd would watch him and raise 10 fingers like a coach or a referee when she thought he should get off. But he also kept falling into silent spells. At the dinner table, he forgot to remove the blue denim baseball cap he wore for yard work. He wasn't combing his hair as carefully as usual. When he read a newspaper about demonstrations in Jerusalem, he rolled the newspaper into a tube and slapped it against his arm. "What's up?" Leanna asked him as he poured gasoline into the lawnmower for the last time. He jumped. "Are you worried we're making a mistake?" "No," he said. "I was just thinking about how I like doing this." She caught him staring at odd things. The hinge on the pantry cabinet, the medicine chest in the bathroom. When she asked what he was doing, he said, "Remembering." Leanna, too, had been trying to memorize at least one small detail about each house on their street. The blue cottage with the crooked chimney, the green 2-story, only half painted. Did the painters break their arms? Did they lose their enthusiasm for that color? The brick house with the pink vine wrapped around its forehead in the summers. Leanna might never see the cherry trees or tulip beds or gray pebbles or cracked sidewalks again. When she was younger, before she went to middle school and her arms seemed to grow longest in the night, she knew the easy latitude and longitude of her world. Now she was moving away to a land she knew little of, except the skillet of olive oil with crumbles of garlic and pine nuts browning on the stove. Leanna's mother stood over the skillet with the spatula poised, like a scientist. Poppy would pass through the house, lifting his nose to the air and saying, "There it is! There's my country!" Well, where was hers? Was she on the verge of finding out? Sometimes Leanna felt she had passed her own country already, and it was an age, not a place. She wrote it down in her notebook, an age, not a place. What did it mean exactly? Leanna loved thinking of first lines for stories or poems or movies. Since fourth grade, she'd kept a running list of them and liked to reread it to see if she could get the stories to go further in her head. The secret kiss grew larger and larger. No one had dialed her number for a dozen years. If she had known her cousin's secret, would she have teased her at dinner? Sometimes she took her list of lines to Mrs. Lindenwood, her old fourth grade teacher, who loved creative writing, and Mrs. Lindenwood would put stars by the ones she liked best. Or Leanna would read them to Poppy in the yard after they'd washed the dinner dishes, as he sat drinking a cup of Arabic coffee in his favorite green metal chair with a scalloped back. On one of their last evenings in St. Louis, Poppy said, "Tell me her cousin's secret." Leanna hadn't read him the one about the kiss. "Sometimes you remind me of City, my mother," he told her. Why? Leanna had a little picture of City in her wallet, standing in a long dress in the archway entrance to her house, making something out of nothing. It's her favorite thing to do. She gets a whole story out of a button or a rock. Leanna was quiet. She flicked at a mosquito, thinking how people considered other people. Did other people think she was strange? City was 80 and Poppy said his mother had lived to be 99. What if it ran in the family? Leanna and Poppy sat silently in the backyard while their gray cat, Sammy, leaped down from the top of the wooden fence to bury his nose in the grass. Sammy was going to live at their aunt's house, but Rafik and Leanna worried she might forget to feed him. They had discussed giving him tranquilizers and stowing him away in their backpacks. Leanna asked Poppy, "Do you remember that Emily Dickinson poem I liked a lot in second grade that starts, 'I'm nobody, who are you?'" "Sort of, but I never thought you were nobody." "I'm even more nobody now than I was then." "Oh, Habibi, don't say that. You're everything you need to be." "Poppy, remember when you told us your 20th birthday was the most important landmark day of your life?" "I do not think it will be a very good day in mine." "That's okay. You're only 14. You have a lot of time. And I only meant it was the landmark day of my life till then. I've had lots of better landmarks since, like the days you and Rafik were born, and every day after. 20 was just a little blip, now that I look back on it." Leanna wrote down, and he said, "A little blip, now that I look back on it." She closed her notebook as Sammy ran toward them with a lizard in his mouth.